Good morning. When I agreed to Amy's flattering remarks about joining you this morning, I was reading a book called Sapiens. It's the history of mankind and explains how we got to where we are today based on our evolution. It was at that same time that she was saying, all you need to do is just make sense of this industry for the folks that are attending. You have 45 minutes, so no harm, no foul. By the way, I'm accustomed to working in the mountain resort communities where no conference ever starts exactly on time. You guys not only started early, but you betrayed the rules that I use, which is about a minute late for every 1,000 feet of vertical. So there may be a little bit of credit time here in the process. I muse about this podium. There was a lot of discussions about a podium. I have extensive notes for myself. So I'll use that, but I thought, podiums sometimes are security blankets for people. You can see this isn't going to get that done. I thought it was particularly attractive because I've got a bike ride coming in the next little while. I don't look like a bike rider probably to you. I don't even look like a bike rider to myself. I have good gravity muscles, but this has a lot of vertical. So I made a commitment to myself, that I'd drop 10 pounds by the time the bike trip starts, which is imminent. I want to let you know, since I'm a data geek benchmarking guy, that I only have 12 pounds to go. So hiding behind, no. So that won't work. Right then, off we go. My agenda is going to benefit significantly from being able to, there you go. Quick introduction. When Simon was talking about the dark ages, I think he was talking about when I first entered this industry. So a lot of what I'll have to say, especially about in the beginning, is like Sapiens is, setting the stage for the problems that were being solved at that stage in the industry. None of us really had a roadmap to how destination travel works. We didn't know many of the things that we now know in the process. So those early days caused us to need to figure out the problems that needed to be solved, and there were plenty of them. We just didn't have a roadmap. In many ways, that hasn't changed. We're here together today, matching the vendors who have tools to help us with the problems that you and the audience have that need to get solved to make us all successful, not only on behalf of your own businesses, but on behalf of your investors and the guests and second homeowners that we all serve. A lot of cooks in that kitchen in the process. So I'll go through that process. My cautions and disclaimers are this idea of being able to benchmark the industry and set the stage, pun intended, for this conference may have been a great idea, but it also may have been a bit of a fool's errand as I have tried to make my way through the process. What I've accomplished so far hasn't been fact-checked to my satisfaction. I'm a quantitative data geek kind of guy. So I offer that qualification, and I look forward to being able to get your help, a sort of crowdsourcing, as we move forward to understand better this industry and how we can collaborate together to the common adversaries outside. So I won't be further distributing this, but the video is going to speak for itself, so no more about that. The way that I got this data together was in the beginning was my own perspective, but I interviewed a group of people that I thought were industry leaders. I had a chance to talk to many of the vendors who are here today, and many of you got a survey that we sent out, a quick little straw poll from the property management companies about what software you use and how you like it. So I have two perspectives to offer. The vendor's perspective about what they think they do and how they do it, and the property management company's perspectives. This is a very simple straw poll, but it gives us a couple of data points. More data points, as we will learn, is a good thing. Pretty much the foundation of what I think happens these next couple of days is based on data. The quality, the quantity, and the ability to slice and dice that data. That's probably what I'm most interested in, what my experience tells you about the best. So with that in mind, I just want to give you a quick little view of the vendors that I did have a chance to talk to. The people that I interviewed, a little to the right that you see, pretty much completed the profile that we've got for all intents and purposes. But I also found the information about the founders of these organizations to be particularly interesting. My own experience is flavored in that way, as you will see, probably time and time again. But there's this phrase from Peter Drucker, when your instrument is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And we have in our founders some folks with experience that come from the property management and hospitality side of the industry. They are most like you, understanding your problems and looking for solutions. We also have amongst those folks technicians, investors and entrepreneurs, folks who have tools that they can offer those of us in the industry in the process. So as you begin to think about what you're looking for and the vendors with whom you work, spend a little time thinking about where they came from, what their experience is, what nails they look at with the hammer that they have to offer. You'll see that, I think, over and over again. Just a little bit about me, my perspective and my bias, since I've just talked about the hammer and the nails. I was one of those typical get out of school, take a gap year off, and go be a ski bum in the mountains. As it turned out, I landed in Aspen. I spent a couple of weeks working in a place called Aspen Alps. The only thing that's notorious about that is that it was the first technical condominium complex in the state of Colorado. And as I think we all know, when we changed from a hotel metaphor to a condominium metaphor, the complications increased fairly significantly, as they did again when we moved from condos to vacation rental industry. Would that it would be so easy as it was in the good old days. But that job gave way to another one in Crested Butte. I took a job as a night auditor. I'll make this a quick story. 4th of July had just tweaked my knee, powder blue day. I was just getting off my job as a night auditor, and the new owners of the resort, a guy named Bo Calloway Gardens, probably some of you know of that place, had purchased Crested Butte, mistook my inability to ski for diligence. This was fog and mirror, days in the industry. And I got hired as comptroller for the resort. Died and gone to heaven. I had the checkbook. From that point forward, one of my first jobs was to try to track the performance of the resort. The marketing and sales guys and gals were always suspect. They had a budget of 10% of their gross receipts. I thought that meant it was my job to find out every time they spent $1, there should be 10 show up somewhere, right? So how would I check that? I became new best friends with the reservation agents and asked them to chit. How did you hear about us? We're talking abacus level technology these days. But in order to do that, I began to collect data. That was the start of return on investment. And it turned out some things generated more than $10, some things generated less, seemed to be pretty easy. If this generates more, you do more. Less, fix it. So that turned into an exercise that caused us to realize that there were a lot of chairlift seats, but not very many beds. So the job was to fill beds, but the business seasonality precluded hotel economics, as it does today in many places. So the way to get beds was to build condominiums that owners would buy and then rent those condominiums from time to time. So I got involved in the condominium development business. Once they were created, they had to be managed. Okay, add a management company. Once they were managed, the beds need to be filled. Okay, let's figure out reservations. How about sales and marketing? Pretty soon, the whole kit and caboodle turned out. Anybody that knows about Crested Butte knows that it doesn't really matter about the lift tickets and the beds because you can't get there anyway. So we got into a process of chartering our own flights, and pretty soon I had a lift ticket, a pillow, and an airline seat that I all needed to sell together, and that became vacation packaging. So I found myself in this central reservation business on behalf of all the lodging properties. I needed to get all of their inventory together so I could help. We had to share the cost of an 800 number for the resort. This is embarrassing to some extent, but it tells a story that I found very exciting, or at least enlightening in the process. So as we figured out these rules, because we didn't know them at the time, we were in effect an inbound tour operator. The center reservations model, somewhat unique. And in that process, working with others in a similar situation through the mountain resort gave us an opportunity to get together and share best practices. That became a group called the Central Reservations Association, Crater. Crater worked together to start tracking their performance. Those were the first sets of benchmarking that occurred both within a resort, amongst those properties, and between resorts. I can remember like it was yesterday, we were up 7%, and I asked my boss for a raise on the way to the end of season industry trade show, only to find out that the industry was up 12. You can see that up 7 was good, but was a lot more interesting in the broader context. So, moral of the story, tracking your own data against yourself is a great place to start. But you gotta figure out who else is out there and how you get their data What I did was bought a keg of beer at the end of the season and invited all the marketing guys to get together because I was sure I would be enlightened, and I was, just not in the way I thought. By the way, that keg happened over and over again and became the Mountain Travel Symposium, which has operated for 40 years or so. Who knew? Turns out that for the first couple of years, it was just a get-together. My CPA experience suggested that if I called it a conference, then I could expense the keg. Webster, check this out, calls such an event a symposium. A symposium is a drinking party where intellectual discussion occurs. That's how we got to the Mountain Travel Symposium. The business rules for the Central Reservations Association, once they were established, became a piece of software called Reservation Technologies. It became Destinations.com, was bought by what was then Apollo and became Galileo, and that's how vacation packaging happened, allowing condos and vacation rentals to be added to the hotels that they could handle. That set me on a consulting services stage for quite a while until the early 2000s when Vail Resorts went public. They had to start announcing their quarterly estimates for their earnings and blew it so badly their stock dropped by half. Adam Aaron, the guy that owned the resort at that stage of the game, basically bought, well, I'm going to find a nice way to say it, demanded better predictive data, and it was the advanced reservation data from the lodging properties that turned out to be the best forward-looking indicator. He ran lodging properties, so he couldn't get the data from other lodgers. He needed an independent third party. I was engaged, and that became Mountain Travel Research Program, which became Destimetrics, which got sold to Entopia at the end of 2017. It's now called Entopia Business Intelligence. So now I'm gainfully unemployed. I have declared myself on sabbatical. It says on one of my websites I'm on airplane mode, which means I respond occasionally in the process, and I don't exactly know how I got here beyond that. So let's get on with the story. That background, I hope, is helpful. I'm going to go through in the beginning, touching on the benchmarks that I think are most germane in the process, a little bit of situational timeline. I would like to call the quest for big data exactly that, but it really never has been that big. It's one of the problems, so humor me while I call it little data, at least to begin with, recognizing the foibles of the quantity and the quality of the data, and then we'll get on to the next stage in the process, which is the ability to benchmark, compare, you against yourself, easier, you against a comp set, a little harder, you against a broader universe, a little more challenging yet, easier when there's only a few unit types to deal with and not much change. We know that's no longer true, and so on goes the process. So I'll go through one set of these in the beginning, relatively quickly, then I'll bring us up to today, the current timeline, and to the extent that there's opportunities, everyone that I spoke with, I've asked what keeps them up at night. Where they see the opportunities, it's like a little SWOT, strengths that make opportunities, weaknesses that make threats. I've asked them what they think. I've ranked that all out. We'll go through as many of those as time allows. I'm not usually a monologue guy, but I can get more information out faster if I just roll. And that's what we'll do. The in the beginning sort of forces at play that got us to where we're at. I've begun to try to create a timeline. I don't expect you to fully be able to see all of these data points, but it starts with my perspective, and this has changed as recently as a couple of days ago, about the technology forces down at the bottom in yellow. Hotels moved to condo inventory. The first time we had a chance to begin to use automation to collect reservation data was when I was making chits, and I realized that if we just used a PC, it was an IBM 36 at that stage of the game, to collect a reservation, we would have that data in a usable form, structured data. That was like an epiphany. Holy mackerel, look at all the things you could do with it. I'll come back to that. So the early days was really about distribution. Sabre, Apollo, and the beginning of hotel systems beginning to put their data in one place so they could get it out to travel agents and tour operators. That was the excuse to put data in one place, but once you had it in one place, it became accessible. It became valuable, and so that's the foundation that we began to use. But the rest of the rules of engagement held still, the dilemma being it was all hotel-centric. So the evolution from hotels to condominiums and the vacation rental industry that ensued all is part of the story that makes your job a little more interesting, let's call it that, than it would otherwise be. I'll come back to this chart a couple of times as we progress from left to right in the overall process. This is an early example of a graphic that was created as the business rules for reservation technologies, that central reservation system. It was all about supply and demand at that stage of the game. It was pretty easy. You got the supply, it was lodging, attractions, whatever caused a guest to come, and transportation, but that's not what a guest wanted. They wanted a vacation. So somebody had to put that together. If you did it internally, it was the central reservations. If you did it externally, it was a tour operator at that stage of the game. Once the vacation was packaged, then how did you get it to the marketplace? Well, it was, never mind all of the old stories about brochure ads and so forth and so on, but the consumer comes down from the demand, either directly or through agents and operators. As you see here, all of this is well and good, but the real magic starts with the reservation agent who collects that reservation data and the ability to use that data not only for the view of customers, but for the view of the destination, the property, its inventory, the supply and demand and such. I submit to you that this is still the foundation of opportunity. It was certainly the epiphany for me. I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. Everything that I thought I needed to solve the problems of the industry were right there in front of me. All I had to do was just slice and dice it. And to this day, I think we're still doing that very same thing. Ironically, the products and rates and data that I think are the subject of this next couple of days continues to be the subject, and I think we do it from the perspective of our relationship with the management company and a second home or inventory, even though the decision maker is the guest. So I offer you as food for thought, the customer data, those to whom we are actually pricing the product, is vastly underrepresented in the lexicon of what we're doing. And when we get done solving all the supply side stuff, we have some new art forms that are opportunity for any vendors who are entrepreneurial enough, and still around, in order to play that game. So boundless opportunities for those of us interested in this industry. My wife thinks that I'm still involved because it's like a moth to flame. You know, not really all that good for the moth, but you just can't help it. Right? It's just more exciting, it's more fun than anything else, and I will not go lightly to a rocking chair. All right, thanks for putting up with that. My epiphany, it really is the value of the reservation data. The fact that it's structured is an unintended consequence of the reservation process. It happens right in the normal process of business. You just have to figure out. Simon, interestingly enough, used the word gold mine, and I think it's exactly what it was. His metaphor that the gold has yet to be mined could work on, but I think an adult beverage at the end of the day will make me more creative. So, a whole bunch of uses in the process. Mine came from trying to understand our own resort and the others, the Central Reservations Association benchmarking, and continues to be resort-based more than it is individual property-based. That's my bias, that's my hammer. So I confess. Destometrics has now been sold to Entopia Business Intelligence. Tom Foley is here. I am no longer directly involved in that organization. No skin in the game anymore, so I get to be my own free agent, say what I want. But I do credit them and some of the data that I put together when I was them. I still have pronoun problems. I might say we, I don't mean that. It's they, it's them. Yeah, well, you see the problem. So a little definition of little data that's sort of gotten big. It's more that can be easily managed, but it's the unintended consequence of what happens in your normal course of business. The reservation metaphor is very straightforward. And I put that in process because as I was looking at the data that I collected, I went out to try to figure out what else was out there. And this is one of the versions of what I found out at an unnamed East Coast destination where the local college was hired by a research group to count license plate tags in the parking lot and aggregate that data together. If this seems archaic, it's probably because it was. If it was a golf course and they had no other access to the data, I understood how that might be the case. But when it was a hotelier with reservation data in their system and they were out counting parking lots and then trying to cross-reference that against a manual sheet from the Census Bureau, I was going like, something's wrong with this program. We can do better than that process. So while lodging properties would count parking lot license plates for their data when they have reservation data seemed like an opportunity too good in the passing. But wait, there's more. On the municipal side, they actually measure sewer effluents. Here's the idea. Sewer effluents was a good early indicator. The idea was your year-round destination residents continue to make contributions on a regular basis. Let's say it that way. When the guest comes in, that's a change, and that change would correspond to the destination visitation, and we could benchmark and track in that way. It went so far as trying to figure out how guests from Kansas or Chicago might vary from those from Texas in the process. And in Crested Butte's days, the Texans were considered to be more. Let's just leave it that way. However, that has never been substantiated. We never came up with the science to be able to figure that out in any way that anybody wanted to implement. So were there opportunities? Absolutely. Was there anything better than the data that we were collecting ourselves? I couldn't find it, frankly, still can't. And I challenge anybody here to find a better way than doing what you already do with more insight and precision yourselves. So the process of benchmarking that comes from the data, I'm going right down the sequence here, at least I hope, started out in this way. I've offered you a little more focus into that timeline that's specific to parts of the industry that I think we care most about. Hotel valuation service, first guys I found on the screen, followed very quickly by Smith Travel Research, STR, who I'm sure all of you know. Interestingly enough, as HVS says, their primary mission, as far as I can tell, was to understand the value of a hotel by tracking the income stream. So when they looked at a reservation, they were looking at the revenue that came into the hotel that they would divide by the number of rooms, and that's how you bought and sold hotels. That's how you borrowed on hotels. Interesting data, but used for real estate valuation and banking purposes. It all occurred with a reservation after it went through the night audit and into the accounting system, and I thought, close. But no cigar for the things that I was interested in any event. It really wasn't until TravelClick showed up that started taking a look at reservation data from the guest perspective and taking advantage of the lead time that's available in the vacation industry to be able to be predictive with that data. Reservation Technologies started that process. The nice folks at Destinametrics were the first that I know that really started doing that in the vacation side of the industry, trying to abide condominiums and vacation rentals as well, and be forward-looking so you could be predictive in the overall process. Some of the other names that came up pretty regularly in those early days, we're still in the beginning, are the names here. No complete list is being represented here, I'm sure, but it's a good start to benchmarking. And as lodging changed, the benchmarking challenge increased a lot. Hotel was relatively easy, right? Supply was static. 100-room hotel always had 100 rooms. And the amount of inventory, single, double, triple, quad, and that was really just pricing. We didn't even have smoking and non-smoking at that stage of the game because there wasn't such a thing in the social lexicon, right? It was just a request, as was the parking lot view and such. So with very static supply, being able to determine demand was easy. Being able to distribute that product was easy. But wait, when condos come along, things get a little more complicated. On the bad side, the supply varies, and it continues to do so for better and worse in the process. You've all had to figure that out. The number of unit types that need to get managed and distributed increases geometrically, as does the pricing in the process. I guess if there's a benefit that we can all take advantage of, it's in the vacation side of the industry, the reservation lead time is considerably longer. I think the reason that hotel valuation services and Smith Travel really never thought about predictability is the lead time was really short. They didn't really have enough time to see that there was lead time that would allow to be predictive. But in the vacation side of things, we can do that. So great benefit that goes with some curses. All you have to do is figure out the curses so you can capitalize on the benefits. Fair enough? You have until 3 o'clock tomorrow. Ready? Well, wait till I'm done. Needless to say, if condos is more involved, the homes, although generally like condos, is considerably more involved yet. Why? Because they almost have to be managed unit specifically, at least in most of the lexicon of what we deal with these days. So now you have vastly more inventory, none of which is exactly alike. How do you distribute it? First question. How do you price it? Second question, et cetera, et cetera. I need go no further, I think, with this metaphor. Timeshare came and went as a big problem to be solved. I haven't heard the phrase in a long time, so I'm not going there. This is a quick illustrative graphic of the first chart that I can find where the state of Colorado tried to figure out their visitation. They asked Smith Travel for their data. They asked Destimetrics for its data, and this is the result. On the left-hand side, we're looking at occupancy where Smith Travel is the blue and Destimetrics is the gold bars. And you can see there's a vastly different change, as you would expect when Smith Travel runs primarily urban and hotel inventory. But you can see it's quite a difference. And you would say, why in the world would you get into the condo vacation rental business at all until you look at the right chart? The right chart is rate. And you can see that a hotel rate, as you would expect, is much more consistent but far lower than the vacation rental industry. So when you put the two together, right, rate times occupancy divided by the number of units creates RevPAR. Sure enough, the vacation rental industry, condos and the like, do a fine job of representing themselves, but on a very seasonal basis, still continues to be a problem. Here's the dilemma that the state of Colorado faced. They had two completely different views and came back and said, which one's right? Which one's right? They're both right for their segment. Smith Travel was just as correct in their view of the universe for hotels and the urban environment that represented their data set as Destimetrics was for its. And so therein lies the need to be very, very careful about the way you use data and the amount you segment, because we've gotten just about smart enough to really shoot ourselves in the foot. And gaming the data is the biggest problem that I see, unintentional gaming the data, not respecting the integrity that's required to do it correctly given the resources involved is the biggest single problem that I feel like the industry faces. I don't know what we do, but put our nose down and continue to work together as best we can until we get over that hump. But if you're looking for stumbling blocks that can go to stepping stones, I submit one for your consideration. Right then, and off we go. So, with the advent of condos in the vacation rental side of things, the proprietary and conventional hotel reservation systems had some work to be done. They had to handle multiple units. They had to handle changing supply. They had to recognize that the accounting went to a second home owner. And the organizations here are some of the first ones that showed up on the radar screen trying to do that. My business was in Colorado because of condominiums and the like. We found a little hotbed. There was another one in Florida. The vacation rental industry needs moved a little bit more out of the eastern seaboard and the sort of outer banks, right, where the problems were clear by the professionals and the solutions were forthcoming by those that are involved. So you see representation along those lines. FRS was the one of choice for me. It also gave me an opportunity to go from Crested Butte to Aspen for the weekend, which worked out just fine. I'll leave that part of the story for your conjecture. Right. So I've showed early days on a couple of different scenarios, but insofar as distribution is concerned, we talked about the GDS systems on the far left. It was sort of as they moved into their version of central reservations, they were in essence just that and called themselves that. The epiphany came when the inbound telephone agents were able to access the data for those who wished to do so, complex vacations and the like, but were augmented by this new thing where a guest could go on their computer screen and use a web interface to access the same data. Holy mackerel, what an opportunity. So we watched the same infrastructure, the centralized reservation system of information being accessed directly by the guest instead of through a telephony. And of course, it continues to be a combination of that for most of us as it is a complex process in the process. And what was begun to be called an alternative distribution system at that stage of the game were those tour operators that were adopting web technology in order to do the same thing that the GDS was doing, but through a different and more affordable channel. And that was the start of the Travelocities and the Expedias, and WorldRes was the first that I know that came up with a statement, something like aggregating non-traditional inventory and distributing it to an advantage vis-a-vis your competition. I have heard different versions of that mission statement forever. I've written two of them myself. And to some extent, I think we're trying to do pretty much the same thing. The only problem is it's really not non-traditional anymore. It's really not an alternative reservation or distribution system. It's all become mainstream in the overall process. It's all inventory. And anybody who started out in this business is going this way. Everybody who started out in this business is going this way. Guess I should do it otherwise, right? Because we're vertically integrating, aren't we? All right, so, yeah, you got it. All right, so here's the genius that went along with revenue management back in the day. Supply and demand. If supply was static and there's more demand, you could raise prices. No golf clap? All right, thank you. Singular. But we're pretty smart because we did it once in the winter season, we did it once in the summer season. We recognized that big difference. Sometimes it was last year plus a couple of percent if things were going pretty well. Sometimes it was go back to the Mountain Travel Symposium and ask your marketing buddy. It wasn't until the year 2000 that we started intentionally lying to one another. You know, that was a level of sophistication and deceit in the industry. I'm not going to tell you who in this room is still doing that. That'll be one of your little adventures du jour. But disinformation is pretty powerful in the process. Brochures, of course, if you only did brochures once a year, how do you change prices on those? The answer was you don't. I think Simon also had a conversation about that. He actually synopsized my whole speech in 4 minutes. Don't you wish I would do so? Well, let's see if I can come up with anything else. But making vacation packages and sending them required a federal regulation, an inclusive tour. You had to file your package before you were able to distribute to make sure that the consumers were being well taken care of. And when we got really good, we decided that Christmas could get more money, so we would call it a season. We didn't change the price. We just made one price for that season and then one price for a lower season. So we had fixed prices, but with variable seasons. That was a trick that the airlines did, right? They just moved their inventory from one pricing bucket to another. I got genius, right? I could do that. Yeah, well, easier said than done. Nonetheless, that was about all there was to it. And the fundamentals, I think, are still sound. But the pace of change in the marketplace and the opportunity to do a better job is obviously the purpose of this conversation. And so with that, this idea about using seasons and a new epiphany, length of stay. If you asked for a 5 or 6 day reservation, there was nothing in the house. If you asked for a 7-day reservation, you had any choice in the universe. Still a problem that we might find ourselves confronted with in many of the resorts. So seasonality, big deal. Terms, deposit cancellation policies, well, the list goes on and you know them better than me. So far, so good? Anybody need adult beverages yet? Okay, a little after 10 o'clock, and I'm going to go through what I think the situation is today and tell you a little bit about the data that I gathered by talking to others. So far, this has been kind of me. Biggest thing that I see and that has been reported consistently by others is that disruption is no longer the exception, it's the rule. We seem to live in this place. The problem with disruption is that it works really well for only a very few. It is, in fact, disruptive to most of the rest of us. We just can't keep up with the pace of change, and I introduced this conversation by telling you my struggles, even to do so. I had probably 15 versions of this slide deck with new information that came along over the last just couple of weeks, and I think exchanging information is one of the values of what's here. Of course, this metaphor that I showed you earlier about inventory has now been really enhanced by different ways to slice and dice and book that inventory. There is not significantly more inventory out there, notwithstanding some new vacation rental inventory, but there are geometrically more ways to book it. And at any given time, there are occasions when you can go look and find one unit represented through 3 or 4 different channels. If you aren't careful and scraping the data or analyzing the data, you'll think there are 4 of Seacrest 107 out there, but you don't even know about it because it showed up here, it showed up here, it showed up here, and it showed up there. So opportunities, but challenges as well, as we not only have to track the different kinds of inventory, but the channels that they live on. Nobody has mentioned price parity once to me in the last month. I expected that to be a huge deal, and I think the truth is we've given up. At least, I'm not sure if the smart ones or the, yeah. All right, so Although I think most of us are focusing on a condo or a unit-specific scenario, this is a destination view. This is an old, a dated graph from Destometrics of a destination. Could be a mountain destination or a summer destination, but it goes from May through October, and it shows the occupancy based on destinations guessed of all of the units that are available throughout the season. I'm pretty sure that this is summer because there's Labor Day, right? And a whole new season in September and October for many of us as schools go back and empty nesters and as such take over. Peaks and valleys, show some weekend business. You can do a lot with this. We sometimes call it an EKG. But the point of this all is probably the fundamental challenge that the mountain resort community has, I think the beach resort community does too, is we cannot attract capital. We cannot attract reasonable investors because the seasonality of the business precludes us hitting the minimum threshold that hotels require to be able to keep the nose above water. And until we as an industry can attract capital, we're going to lose the opportunity to grow with the marketplace, individually, as a destination, et cetera, et cetera. So the rhetorical question is, how do you get to 60% year-round occupancy in a destination resort? We're finding ourselves working too hard on the peaks and suffering the consequences of overcrowding, which come back in regulatory reform. We compete with our bed base between the destination guest and the resident, and then regulations come in to solve that problem, instead of finding a way to soften the peaks and grow the valleys so that we have more consistency for our own business. You have to have 6 or 7 months of revenue that seeds expenses to be able to float your boat, as does your second homeowner, as does your locals who represent the workforce that I bet you are all challenged with. So whether you call it a strike zone of let's not go above about 80 or 85 effective occupancy, really that's almost at capacity. Let's focus on the strike zone. Let's not bother with that below. It might be like we decided collectively to do Robin Hood pricing, not for the benefit of the individual unit owner, but in order to take pressure off the peaks and grow the valleys to the point that there is an economic equation that works for everyone. So my mission as I continue to reinvent myself is to try to figure out how to crack this nut. It's a broader economic conversation, but some of what you're doing on a day in and day out basis, you might be interested in knowing there are those of us out there who think there's a bigger fish to fry. Bigger in the macro, of course, not to you individually. So thank you for letting me handle that. The targets of opportunity are where there's plenty of supply and still enough demand to make those opportunities work. I've just circled some. Down below that, frankly, an investment doesn't have a return. Up above that, you're building a peak on a peak and contributing to overcrowding that's going to come back and bite you. So just a thought, food for thought. Just cap peaks, fill valleys, help us with some new attractions that bring people in during the times that we need them the most. Bada bing, bada boom. It's all done. Another big change. In the last couple of years, I've noticed a huge difference, and I heard it referenced in, I think, a VRM Intel conference. In that scenario, commercial hotels with fixed supply don't have to worry about their supply. They spend all their time trying to fill it up. They're demand focused. In the last couple of years in your industry, supply cannot be given. The focus is how do you get the inventory that you need to build a business case, and we'll worry about growing the demand later on. So the whole focus is shifted entirely in the mentality, bring a hotelier in here and change the supply on them and give them a different equation like this, and they spend a little while scratching their heads until they try to figure out how that works. Tell them about the predictive value of a 90-plus day out reservation, and they got to think about it just a little bit. So the supply land grab, this sort of feeding frenzy, is part of the equation. I'm going to just reiterate the vendors that are here, because these are the guys and gals, of course, who provide the tools that help you in the process. So for the next few minutes, I'm going to go through the assessment of the profiles that I went through. This is very high level, not properly representative in many different ways. But the first thing that you see here is an assessment of the vendors based on how long they've been in business and how many employees they have, to give you a rough notice, starting with Smith Travel Research, which messes up the whole graph by their process. What was Destometrics that became Intopia, around for a long time. Red Awning showed up more recently. There's two flavors of rented. When they originally started in the current business case, and I guess I have them where they originally started, but you can kind of see over time how much activity there's been in benchmarking in the reservation side of things versus the people who were originally going at the business for different reasons. So it's a little bit of a graphic about the different vendors and how they play. When asked the services they provide, and these are all listed on the left-hand side alphabetically, you can see that some of them are still in the distribution business. That's how they get their inventory. Others are using any means available. I'll show you that, where do you get your business in just a moment's time. But pricing tools are thought to be something that really provides a pricing recommendation, a methodology, an algorithm that makes a suggestion to you, the property manager. But that's a little different than a service, someone who comes in and helps the process by looking at the data and assisting you, the property manager, or perhaps even in the outsourcing business, doing that for you instead of you having your own specialized resource. Tricky business, not to be underestimated, and so outsourcing resources are thought to be valuable in the overall process. With that in mind, the next question comes up: where do you get your data, right? It's your data for yourself, but it's how do you get the comp set data in an apples versus apples way. Easier said than done, but this is a little bit of some people will take data any way they can get it. Others focus on a typical scenario, usually internally sourced data. Data that comes from the reservation system of a hotel or a management system is thought to have most integrity, but it doesn't give you the broader context of scraped data. Some people think that's genius. Some people think that's yet a work in progress. Some combination of putting them together may be the best for you to decide, but this is a little bit about how that all plays. I took a look at the top-rated vacation rental management systems here just out there on the web, and then I asked you guys who you use, and the numbers that you see here are representative of the early reservation folks in this room, divided by 100%. So you can see, for example, Escapia is used by 23% of the people who answered the survey. There were 33 businesses represented, absolutely not statistically valid, so use this for whatever purpose you find interesting. But it is a straw poll sample of the overall room. This is what the top PMSs look like just based on usage, once again from that same chart. LiveRes Escapia V12, of course, I had to add this footnote, not very long ago. And the people I talked to a couple of months ago that had spent the last year building APIs for Escapia are the ones that, for V12 are the ones that we'll find in the bar, I guess, tonight. What are you going to do? All right? Benchmarking tools. The names that come to your mind without any prompting for us that seem to have some mind share in benchmarking tools are Key Data. Manual is some version of doing it yourself or using your own PMS. HomeAway's Market Maker shows up pretty strongly there. I'm otherwise not focusing on PMS systems, but it gives you a little bit of a touch. The revenue management tools, Beyond Pricing, seems to be leading. Internal tools, this is another version of do it yourself with your own data. And Key Data showing up on the radar screen, although a relatively newer entry into the marketplace, one that I understand Amy knows something about. Right, I can't do Net Promoter without going through a lot of hoopla, and this really isn't Net Promoter, but it is the answer to to what extent would you recommend what you now use, right, in each of these scenarios, where the active promoters on the right-hand side are measured, sorry, it doesn't work if I hit my own monitor, against passive supporters and detractors, and lo and behold, property management systems are not as easily appreciated. Benchmarking a little less bad, and revenue management, maybe we just don't know what we don't know yet, or maybe things are going along really pretty well as our needs are being answered in the overall marketplace. Right, so distribution now moves to the next level, which is the web-based versions of the OTAs, the alternative distribution systems, the VR platforms that we start seeing showing up, and that seems to occur until 2005, 2006. Turns out at dinner last night, I found out that Simon had amassed something on the order of 50,000 vacation rental units in Europe. Doesn't even show up on my stinking screen. So this is very limited data nonetheless. It was the advent of the vacation rental business that prompted a lot of this. And since that time, frankly, it looks like we are consolidating. looks like mergers and consolidations are occurring. There are fewer and fewer distribution channels as some guys gobble up other guys and leave you with fewer choices in the process, or the opportunity to disrupt the disruptors, which will be the next stage. I don't know if I'll be around. This is kind of the Air players. I have two versions of Airbnb. The one on the left I'll call Mindshare. Their influence on the industry is absolutely overwhelming, and as far as I can tell, not supported by actual fact, at least in this leisure travel individual vacation rental market. Maybe an urban hotel, but man, the extent to which we are all following them like lemmings, and the mergers that have occurred while other guys try to defend themselves against a mindshare company is astonishing to me. It's taking over. Or perhaps already has. So I just offer that not because it's true or false, but because it's puzzling to me, and I'm the presenter. Later benchmarking updates, recent additions that have come in the last couple of years, 10 to be precise, from that previous benchmarking. By the way, I am officially out of time. I owe Amy some very close attention, but she and Simon got us started enough that I actually technically have 6 minutes. So I'm going to go right on unless somebody stops me. In 6 minutes, I'm going to look at you guys, and I'm probably going to shut up unless you make me talk. Big problem, right? All right, so after taking a look at the agenda, I decided not to even try to go very far into the revenue management today. That's what others here, much more qualified than me, are going to do. But there's a simple definition that's out there and used a lot. Oh, look, I just bought, no, I didn't. Yes, I did. No. I started a glossary and opened up last week's version of VRM Intel, and there it is, on page 56, I think, in the magazine. I gave up myself. Go to the VRM Intel magazine, it may be online, and get all the definitions that you need about the different notions that go along there. But revenue maximization is way different than revenue management in my economy, and it includes distribution and marketing and demand generation and merchandising that may be as important as anything else, but are not the subject of this conversation today. The basic 5 steps: got to get the data, got to figure out what your comp set is or isn't, a similar group, from the consumer's point of view, I might add. Forecasting, the predictive notion of what's going to happen that you can count upon. Optimization, how you tweak it so it'll work, and then repeat. Relatively straightforward. It must be casually interesting. Somebody's taking a picture of it, not me. I hate these screens. Nobody ever looks at me. This is a fun one. Sort of came up in one of my discussions. The idea of pricing and pricing algorithms, and whether it's sort of like autonomous driving. Are you ready to go into the back seat of the car? Are you ready to take your hands off the wheel altogether? And I put those two together. I don't know if we're really coining a phrase. Maybe it's already out there. But it was a conversation with Cliff Johnson. So now I offer you autonomous pricing for your consideration, but not necessarily an endorsement. It seems to be the holy grail, but are you ready to go in the back seat and let an algorithm run unoverseen? And of course, I'm supposed to be objective in my data, so I won't make any mention of this slide at all, just in case I would flavor what's going to go on. All right, now I have 47 minutes. This is really kind of great. I'm going to go just through a very quick look at what the people that I talked to said they are most interested in looking forward, and that will conclude my comments. Is that right? Is that right? Guess what? Data. Quantity and quality of data, especially when you're using two sources, an internal source and an external source. Go back to that Smith Travel Destometrics graphic by way of example to see how you can shoot yourself in the foot. It turns out that more data is always good, but if you have less data, to some extent, you can manipulate it carefully with fancy math and come to the same conclusion. It could be called science. I'll leave it at that. But The I want your data is a big part of what many of us are about right now, not just for the supply side inventory, but for your ability to be predictive and analytical at a level you cannot yet achieve in the overall process. Of course, along with the acquisition of data is who owns that data and a whole lot of considerations, many more to come as our federal government steps in to help us self-manage on behalf of our consumers, even though, never mind, I almost went political about that. And many organizations out there in the industry that are in the business are also in the data collection business for their own purposes. But you begin to wonder about conflicts of interest if your data provider is also one of your partners in the industry and a competitor. They'll know more about the business. That's good. But the word trust would have to come into this play about with whom you work and how that data is being wielded and who really owns that data, how it plays out. Another one beyond the subject of this conversation. Of course, along with that comes regulation. The regulation is coming from those who are helping us too much on behalf of the consumers, ironically protecting those pillows, I guess, from the locals who are losing the pillows against the destination guest. But nobody's really telling the story of the value of a bed when a guest with a charge card stays in it for 40 or 50 or 60 days in a week. And the Build a Church for Easter Sunday opportunity that comes to scale up your supply just when you need it, when big events are occurring, and bring it right back down when you don't. Fascinating story that economics really justify that's not being told in the municipal arena, with maybe one or two exceptions. This is one, many of you know Matt Curtis, preacher from Home Away Days, now preaching on our mutual behalf and a conference, first that I know about, that's really tackling this. His target are the municipal organizations, the regulators, who misunderstand what's going on in the process. At least that's my view. Yeah, explosive growth. This one seems to be scary. It's just overwhelming, the amount of money and interest that has any of the letters that go along with the word Airbnb associated with them in the overall process. But it makes me wonder about where we are in the life cycle of this and how long we get to go as the music continues to play and there are not enough chairs to go around when it stops. So I've begun to sort of just give you a couple of different stages of where we live, and only a couple of days ago started asking others where they think we are in the cycle. It's a rhetorical question, but it's probably more important to the fundamentals of your comfort in sleeping at night as you invest in the future of a business to keep up with the big guys, to know how long the runway is. I got three metaphors going, don't I? The power curve, the musical chairs, and the runway. If that doesn't do it, I guess I better move on. Which is the consolidation story. A lot about consolidation. The mountain resort industry ends up being a Vail Epic and an Interest Altera universe. Good news and bad news, but it's happening everywhere despite what we think about it. It's just how you play it out. My consideration is there appear to be many fewer really big guys as they consolidate together. And from a vendor standpoint, you'd like to work with big guys. They have problems to solve and resources to help and so forth and so on. I think we have no fewer management companies because there's a whole bunch of little guys, right? My sister, her cousin, and some of the neighbors, including a few of them at the swim club, all have second home units, and pretty soon I'm a property management company. 5, 10, 15, 25 units. Many of us vendors are now trying to figure out how to help those individual guys put together their products and services and send them out to the marketplace. That's the opportunity, it seems, today, and it seems to be rapidly expanding, or is it? Where are we on the power curve? But sometimes it feels a little like bottom feeding to me. If I had a choice, right? I'd rather have a couple of big guys, just to tell you the truth. There you go. Yep, and what I call a pillow fight. When a destination guest is pitted against a local for the highest and best use of a bed, who's going to be able to pay the most? And so it goes. There's not enough beds to go around, and the competition for that is now being the source of much of the regulation in the process. Standards and best practices, you can see here what I suggest about how we, a relatively nascent industry in many ways, work together. I couldn't even get a lexicon. When I talk to some organizations, a property means a hotel complex. Somebody else, it's a single unit, et cetera, et cetera. Will we ever solve that? I'm not sure we'll solve it entirely, but to the extent that we can work together to really add professionalism to this industry as it matures, I think we have an opportunity to think not about our competition at the next table, but our competition in the broader marketplace. I would tell you a story, but I won't. Expertise. If you're not going to count on the algorithm to take care of this complicated work, then you're taking maybe a seasonal employee that is now a trusted reservation agent, giving them a book or a class and saying, work this out. Yeah, upside opportunity there, right? Don't trust the algorithm, but don't trust the reservation agent to override that. And we don't even get it. If people don't understand the airline systems at this stage of the game, how are we expected to really grasp and handle this? Well, my answer is slide 10. The extent to which we can decide to play together. This is how my stinking little Central Reservations became the Central Reservations Association that became the Business Rules and Reservation Technologies. This is how my Kegger turned into being, a 40-year runner of the Mountain Travel Symposium, where we come together and try to do better collectively than we could independently. My grandpa was one of those rural farmers that ran the co-op, and that's where I spent my Wonder Bread years, and it just seems like there are a lot of opportunities for us to work together that would solve many of the problems we have, if only we could. So, final conclusion, just like the Sapiens book initially indicated, it's not the fittest or the most cunning, right? It's the adaptive, but if you commit to being adaptive, what yardstick, what compass do you use to do so? This goes right back to the reason we're here today, and it's been my pleasure to tee us up. I hope you have a great conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ralf.